I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the MG ZS EV. Now, the ZS EV is one of the more affordable EVs on the market here in Australia, and it's been around for several years now. In the past, we've been critical of the ZS EV for its range, but that's one thing that MG has worked on very consistently since the ZS EV first came out. They've increased the size of the battery, they've changed the battery chemistry, they've improved battery density, and now we've ended up with a ZS EV with just under 70 kilowatt hours of battery size. It's got 440 Ks of claimed range. We're going to be testing that claim in today's video. However, the MG ZS EV now has another big problem, and that's that the EV market is marching ahead here in Australia. Out of the two EVs that MG now sells here, the ZS EV is definitely the second best, and that's because the MG4, the new small hatchback EV from MG, is a truly excellent car for its price, whereas the ZS EV is really only average, or perhaps not quite that good in the segment that it competes with. So what should you end up buying? I'm going to let you know my opinion at the end of this video. We're going to check out the interior, the back seat, the boot. We'll discuss the running cost and the range, and we'll take a drive in the ZS EV to understand what this vehicle is all about. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. The first thing you need to know about the ZS EV is that it is not based on a bespoke EV platform, such as rivals like the BYD Atto 3. Instead, the ZS EV is based on a very cheap, petrol-powered small SUV, a car that retails in the $20,000 price range, not close to $60,000 drive away, which is the price of the EV long range that we're sitting in here. Now, of course, I get that EVs cost a lot more than petrol or hybrid cars. That's fine. It's just that in this car, you can definitely tell that the interior is built for a much cheaper car than what you're actually paying for this vehicle. And you can tell that in the material choice, in the fit and finish, in the build quality. It doesn't have the substantial feel of cars that you'd normally pay close to $60,000 for, luxury vehicles, or the substantial feel of the BYD Atto 3, to be fair, which has nicer build quality and materials inside. But let's talk about the car we're here to review, the ZS EV. And it starts with this steering wheel, which looks very attractive. Black perforated leather with red stitching. There is certainly shades of 2010 Volkswagen in this steering wheel, but that's not an issue. But it is quite a rough selection of leather, but we're looking through at a digital instrument cluster, or semi-digital, big color screen with trip computer readout, so you can't put a map or audio information there. Still, it works well enough. MG has put a new screen into the ZS EV. It's now 10 inches in diameter, clear, crisp, bright. It has wired Apple CarPlay and wired Android Auto with a choice of USB-C or USB-A ports and integrated navigation. And that honestly all works absolutely fine. I like the fact that MG has gone for toggle keys down here for your fan speed, volume, temperature. Good to see physical controls for those important functions. But you will notice the pedal box, and in fact just the driver's area here, is very narrow, and people that are of a bigger frame than myself are probably going to find it a little bit too tight here in the driver's seat. Speaking of the seats, they're covered in vinyl, which is going to be hot and sweaty in summer, particularly because they're black. But right now on a 12-degree winter's day in Sydney, it's fine. And the seats are also heated. They're electrically adjustable for the driver in 6 ways, but the seat comfort, the ergonomics, is not good. The MG4 has a much, much better seat than this car. Far better shape. It's also fabric, so it's going to soak up more of that heat in the summer, at least in the base model. What else have we got going on here in the interior? Well, there's a 6-speaker stereo that sounds good enough. Panoramic opening sunroof, I like that touch. We've got big cup holders between the seats, wireless device charging, and also a bin here, plus big door bins for a large water bottle. So it's a functional interior. It's good enough. Does it feel almost 60 grand in price? Nowhere near. You can tell it's based on a car which is much cheaper than this. Before I start on the backseat space, it's probably also worth pointing out that the MG ZS EV's interior is much more conservative and straight-laced than the BYD Atto 3, which is this car's major rival and is about 3 to 4 grand cheaper, even in extended range trim for that car. Now, not everyone will like the wild colors that BYD have used for the interior of the Atto 3, but the material quality is a lot nicer in that car. But back to the MG ZS EV. As you can see, space on offer in the backseat is pretty good, at least in terms of legroom and headroom for myself at 6 foot, sitting beneath an opening panoramic glass sunroof, a very nice feature. But the seat base is insufficiently tilted to support my legs. Of course, we're sitting on a big 69.9 kilowatt hour usable battery, which is driving up the floor, meaning that on a long road trip, what are you going to have to do? Well, you're going to have to splay your legs in order to get any support, and that's not comfortable. As for amenities back here, we've got air vents, that's great. We've got 2 USB ports, also very good. Both front seats have a map pocket, but no flip-down armrest and no headrest in the center either. And all of these materials back here are pretty ordinary. Moving around the back of the ZS EV now, I think it's appropriate to mention that one of the upsides of this vehicle is that it's actually pretty good looking in my eyes, especially the facelift version. It's a tidy looking small SUV. The track is a little bit narrow, and if you're following one of these on the road, you'll sort of see that the track is maybe a touch awkward because it's so narrow, but the overall proportions of the vehicle are pretty tidy actually. Now, you come around the back here, it tells you it's an EV, and you've also got a little pilot badge because this car's got MG's pilot suite of driver assistance technologies. MG has gotten rid of that badge on the new MG4, and I think that's probably the right move. You don't need to tell us that. Now, it's a manual tailgate, opens up nice and lightly, and reveals a big boot. More than enough space to leave some promotional number plates for the car in there. Now, we've got cubbies off to the left and right of the boot floor. Lift up that boot floor and you've got your compressor because there's no spare wheel or tire on this car, but also heaps of space for your charging cables. So you can carry around your granny charger in this car, no issue. But there is no frunk, so this is all the cargo space you're going to get. Like all EVs that we test in-house, we put the MG ZS EV long range through the Chasing Cars range and charging tests. This EV has a WLTP claimed consumption of 15.8 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks for a claim range of 440 kilometers, and we almost hit that in urban driving where we recorded 16.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers for a range of 426 kilometers in the city. That's pretty handy, but the ZS EV long range was ironically not very long range on the highway, where its inefficiency saw us get 19.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers for a real-world highway range of 358 kilometers. That certainly didn't help when it came to the ZS EV long range's highway recharging test, which took 1 hour and 16 minutes. That's because we recharge EVs from a real-world 50 to 350 kilometers of highway range. Given this car can only go 358, we had to top off the battery to 98%, which of course is when EVs start charging very slowly. But things were much rosier when it comes to the servicing and warranty. This car has long service intervals of 24 months or 40,000 kilometers, and the first 6 years or 120,000 kilometers of servicing costs just $1,400, which is very inexpensive. The warranty lasts for 7 years with unlimited kilometers. Impressively, the battery warranty is also 7 years with unlimited kilometers. Most rival vehicles cap their battery warranty at about 160,000 Ks, so well done MG. And finally, when it came to insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $997 to comprehensively insure a new MG ZS EV. Everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live and your driving history. So what is the MG ZS EV like to drive? Well, a bit like the interior, it drives mostly like a very affordable small SUV that has been given an electric motor. That obviously fundamentally changes the way it drives compared to a petrol ZS EV, at least in the way it goes and stops. But some of the ride, some of the handling is kind of similar. And in a lot of ways, this car represents old MG. And by that, I don't mean old, cool, vintage, classic British convertibles. I actually mean the early years after the Chinese purchased the MG name. There's kind of old MG and new MG. We haven't really seen much of the latest work of MG in Australia yet, but the MG4 is going to kickstart that. I've reviewed that on Chasing Cars already and found it to be really proficient and a major step up in terms of driving dynamics and quality compared to MG's existing vehicles. And of course, those existing vehicles include this. The ZS EV is in many ways perfectly serviceable, but it is not great to drive. And you may have already detected in the audio here this sort of strange rattling noise, which is just coming from the base of the windscreen and the end of the dashboard there where there's a quality problem. And this car only has 679 kilometers on the clock. It's brand new, so it should be perfect. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's start with the battery and the motor. So we have a 69.9 kilowatt hour usable battery in this car, which is pretty big, but because of a chemistry change to nickel, manganese, cobalt, even though it's got a significantly bigger battery than the smaller battery version of the ZS EV, it actually doesn't weigh much more at all, and it is one of the lighter EVs on the market, which is a good thing for consumption and also for handling, usually. The motor has also been detuned to reduce consumption a little bit further. So compared to the regular ZS EV, even though we're paying a lot more, here you actually get less power, 115 kilowatts of power and 280 newton meters of torque from the single motor on the front axle, which is quite different to the MG4, which is a rear-wheel drive car, which has 125 kilowatts of power in base model form. So if it's starting to sound like the MG4 is a major step change for MG, which is going to leave its current models in the dust, well, then that is exactly the right perception. This is sort of the last of the old guard here. Now, is it powerful? It's actually nippy enough. MG claims a sprint from 0 to 100 in the mid 8-second range. I'll put our independently tested numbers up here on the screen now. But the sort of 0 to 50, 0 to 60 kilometer per hour speed is definitely zippy enough, and in town you'll find that there's enough power. It's really more for overtaking on the highway where the ZS EV starts to run out of puff compared to some other EVs, including the BYD Atto 3, which has a 150 kilowatt, 310 newton meter motor on the long range model. You also can't get a dual motor all-wheel drive version of the ZS EV, though one is under consideration for the MG4 for later. When it comes to ride and handling, the ZS EV falls short in a couple of key areas. Firstly, the steering is a little bit slow, so you find yourself having to add a bit more lock in this car compared to some other rivals, but that isn't much of a problem, and at least the steering is light. The bigger issue is the ride quality, which is brittle and noisy. The ZS EV has McPherson strut front-end suspension and just a simple cheap torsion bar at the rear, and you can tell as the rear bangs through bumps and has a nasty din into the cabin as it sort of echoes around that space. Somehow the wheels just seem to drop into holes in this car. I don't know if it's an unsprung mass problem because the tires and the wheels look pretty small and light to me, but this car simply doesn't ride with polish or finesse. And when the BYD Atto 3 has the best ride quality out of any small SUV, as we determined on our recent 18-car small SUV mega test, it's simply not good enough that the ZS EV can't ride properly at low speed. At higher speed, things are actually a little bit more tidy, but of course, most people are going to spend most of their time in this car going relatively slowly in town, and you're seriously going to notice the fact that the ride is choppy and noisy in this car, which is disappointing. Of course, that affects overall refinement. Even though the rest of the experience is reasonably quiet in this car, there is a bit of motor whine. And on the safety front, it does have lane keeping assist and blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert at this level. Though the lane keep assist is a little bit bitey and it doesn't always kick in when you start to approach the side of the lane. So it feels a little dated in that way. It does have AEB as well, this vehicle, and adaptive cruise control, which is of course nice to have on road trips. So those are my impressions of the 2023 MG ZS EV long range. Undoubtedly, the ZS EV is a much better car now than when it first launched in Australia. The problem is the competition has marched forward too, and at a faster rate than the ZS EV. It's now too expensive and lacking in polish for you to buy this over something that we find easier to recommend. For instance, the BYD Atto 3, which is cheaper. It's a gold star winner here on Chasing Cars, and it offers similar range with better driving dynamics. If you want an MG themselves offer a far better car in the MG4. Much better to drive, higher build quality, more efficient, available with longer range, and cheaper than this car, radically cheaper in several of its specifications. Or if you can splash a bit more cash, a base model Tesla Model 3 is an even safer bet. For sure, the ZS EV has its likable parts, but the competition has simply advanced past where this car is at the more affordable end of the electric car market. Very keen to know your views though, so of course, please leave me a comment down below this video. If you've liked the video, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss any of our EV reviews. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.